Okay, so the motion for today's debate is this House would put an upper age limit of 60 years old for individuals running for political office. On the side of the proposition, we have a team from Uganda, with the first speaker being Raima, the second speaker being Zephyr, the third speaker being Jesse, and Raima will also be doing the reply. On the opposition, we have a team from England, with the first speaker being Alex, the second speaker being Maya, and the third speaker being Jess, and Maya will be doing the reply. I would like to wish both teams the best of luck and hand over the word to our chair judge.
Okay, hello everyone. Congratulations on making this last part. The way this is going to work is the exact same way it's been working until now. The introduction was missed, and the reason why we hope you know it by that point. If there are any clarifications, feel free to ask us. My name is Maurice. I'm from Greece. I'll be chairing the round. Judging with your part.
Hi, I'm Kiana. Best of luck to all teams.
I'm Jeremiah. Best of luck to all teams. Perfect. Please refer to the panel as a whole, and best of luck to those teams. Unless there are any questions, and we're good to go. I'd like to follow up from one talk in this debate. Okay, great.
Okay, can I be heard? So first of all, I'd like to make a shout out to my teammates. This is our first time breaking as a country. It's very good. And
Sorry, probably be a little bit louder because it's a bit echoey.
okay, I'm going to be so this is better.
Yes.
I'm going to be starting my speech. Let me just start my speech. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. With globalization in place and the fast-growing dynamics of the world, it is safe to say that all countries need political representation that is best able to adapt to these situations and help the nation progress. We think putting an age limit does that. We affirm this motion. A few points note and setup. Firstly, is what is needed for people to run for political office. 4 things here. A, it needs a high level of mental stability and resilience. Why is this true? It involves a lot of work, both during the campaign and when you're elected, i.e. you wake up at 5 to take up calls, or you go to different places to speak to different dignitaries. B, it requires a lot of on-the-go work, i.e. air travel. It requires you to have a lot of movements. It requires you to do a lot of work specifically to help your country. C, we do agree to some extent that it requires a lot of experience, but the most individuals who enter office normally enter office when they are at a young age and normally monopolize the office at the end of the day. But also D, it often takes a mental toll on those individuals. What it implies is that these people who enter these offices need to be at their highest peak in order to understand and in order to be able to cope with this mental toll due to the lot of work that is done. Why is this characterization important? It shows you that these individuals to be elected need to have some level of stability to handle the process due to the bulkiness of the political process. Secondly, what do people 60 years and above look like? 2 things. A, in society, there's an increasing rise of dementia, that is to say the decline of people's cognitive ability. That is to say right now in the United States of America, 53% of the population of 65 years old are individuals who have dementia. These are people who forget a lot. These are individuals who do not literally remember a lot of things that they necessarily do. But also secondly, we think that the reason why this is happening is because of the massive workload that these individuals do during their young ages. Why? Because of their increased need to get rich, but also secondly, their need to compete within the society and to become better within that sort of society. But also thirdly, it's just an account of what our model looks like. 2 things. 1, the constitution of these countries will put laws that prohibit people above the age of 60 to run for office. This looks like places like MPs, this looks like presidential posts, this looks like mayoral posts. But also secondly, even if the only individuals that we are allowing to run for office are below the age of 60, it doesn't change the political process. That is to say, it is a merit-based process. You bring your CVs, you bring your certificates in all instances. That means the comparative within this debate is simple. Side opposition has to defend a world where there is no upper age limit, i.e. you have to depend status quo within Russia, within Uganda, within countries like the United States of America. I'll take your point of information.
Joe Biden stepped down. The mere speculating speculation that he had really early dementia. Surely there were already checks and balances in place. You have to defend telling a healthy...
The fact that he stepped down because he had dementia, it shows that that is a problem that individuals above the age of 60 have, and that is a problem that cannot be put in the political system because we need stable individuals within the political system. 3 arguments within our speeches today. Firstly, why we get more young people in the political process and why that is good. Secondly, on the cognitive decline of older politicians and why that is something that is bad to the political system, and an impact analysis that is going to be coming from the first speech. So to start off on why you get more young people in the political process and why that is something that is good. The thesis here is that on our side of the house, you create a less competitive space for these individuals to truly engage with themselves and to see who is better to lead these individuals. What it looks like is A, the actual running of election of these individuals. That looks like 60-year-old, less than 60-year-old individuals running within elections. Secondly, it looks like the youth actually engaging in the voting process and electing leaders that they want. Why is this true? 2 things. 1, we think the optics around old leaders in status quo is something that is bad. This is true because the demands of younger people within society keep changing. That is to say, in 2000 people wanted abortion, then in 2006 individuals didn't want abortion. 3 things then to note on this argument. 1, the narrative in young people's minds is that older individuals cannot understand their needs in the vast majority of instances, because in most instances when young people want certain policies, older leaders do not cater for them within all instances because they are catering for the bigger people who are capitalistic, who have money, who benefit them within their elections. Secondly, they don't relate to them in a personal level because these are people who are not of their age and they don't understand their demands. But also thirdly, due to the media narrative that has been preached, for example, in the US, they say that Joe Biden is Sleepy Joe, and like the media paints these individuals as very old and incapable of the office. The implication of this is that even if opposition proves that these people are fit to run to office to some extent, it still cannot work because young people don't like them. The larger percentage of the society is that young people do not accept them within society. What are the impacts within this debate? 1, we think that one of the major factors of low voter turnout is because people do not literally have choices because of the monopoly that older individuals create, because the only option I have to vote is either an 82-year-old dementia person or a 70-year-old dementia person, right? But also secondly, we think that these young individuals do not give public approval to these leaders because these leaders have already been shamed on social media, or these leaders don't do the things that they necessarily want. This means that they won't give even respect to the policies that these leaders necessarily pass. But also secondly, we think that it is very negatively impactful to the young who want to run for office. 2 mechanisms that's why this is true. 1, we think that older people tend to monopolize politics using the power that they have already accumulated. Notice that they have a lot of money already. Notice that they can carry out massive lobbying techniques to actually take this power. But also secondly, we think that in many countries they can use things like corruption, right? Because they have a huge, significant power that already exists, that they have already accumulated. But also finally, we see that in most countries, they actually arrest political opponents in the vast majority of instances, right? The impact of this is twofold. 1, young people are demotivated to run for these offices. That is why we have a huge threshold of all individuals within office. But also secondly, they don't even want to vote because they don't see their representation to vote. Why are young people specifically important in this debate? 1, we think that they constitute of the most population within society. That is to say, there are over 50% of individuals in society. That means we have an active obligation to protect them. No, but also secondly, we think that most of the policies affect them more because they are going to live longer in the vast majority of instances. So we think that they would literally affect those individuals more. The comparative on our side of the house is that we think that we have more engagement in politics. Why? Because we give these young individuals a chance to be in politics and to actively engage in these politics. We think this is important because of 4 things. 1, because we get more political obedience because we have given them some sort of representation, but also secondly, they get to buy into the legitimacy of these leaders because these leaders can relate to them and these leaders are their age brackets. 3, there's a more diverse perspective in the vast majority of instances because we've gotten a diversity of leaders existing, but also finally, just on principle, we get more numbers within our side of the house to participate within elections. And we think these are the things that democracies want to uphold because they want to uphold representation. Secondly, on our argument on the cognitive decline of older politicians, the thesis here is that the older you grow, the less productive you become. 2 mechanisms here. We think that many leaders 6 years and above find difficulty in performing essential tasks. Tasks like where you have to walk to different countries, tasks like where you have to attend a lot of meetings. But also secondly, right, we think that there is a tendency for you to lose respect amongst the people or amongst the international community because of the sorts of policies that you necessarily pass, but also because of the sorts of policies that you necessarily pass within the society, but also because of you not being able to actually do what the people want in the vast majority of instances, but also because of you not being able to represent the younger generation because you want to benefit some sort of capitalists that always fund your sort of your election. Within our side of the house then necessarily becomes better because one, we have more individuals participating within these sorts of elections because we have included the youth, but also secondly, we get more representation of these individuals who literally are affected the most by these sorts of policies, but also finally we have a sort of benefit within society.
I would like to thank the speaker for this very conversation about the first opposition. Three people when you came to this side here.
Can I check if I'm audible at this volume?
A little bit louder would be better.
Is this better?
Thank you.
The last time I checked, the definition of an elderly is not people with dementia, it's not people who cannot walk. Proposition relies their case on an assumption that the vast majority of elderly are the most unhealthy people who are unable to carry out political tasks. Reading that's quite disingenuous, especially after Maya's POI, when she explains to you, especially in politics, there are massive checks and balances to ensure that the politicians that are elected are quite healthy. I want to talk about a few things in my speech. Stance, rebuttal, then firstly, why we protect choice, secondly, why the value of age is incredibly important in politics. Firstly, what's our stance? 4 things. 1, we agree that we defend the status quo, that there's no upper age limit for people running for office. Secondly, this debate is not about choosing between an 80-year-old dementia politician or a 70-year-old dementia politician. Give me one example of an election that actually happens. Rather, we stand behind mechanisms to ensure the well-being of people running for office. There's things like health checks being publicly released. But also, regardless of this, there's a strong incentive for the public and the party not to support candidates with health issues running. See Biden in the US stepping down after losing support from Obama and after getting massive media scrutiny. But thirdly, notice that we live in the 21st century and 60-year-old just isn't that old. This clashes with the assumption when they say, oh, but more people have dementia. Is this really true? I don't think it's true. For example, there are more improvements in medical technology, so people are generally quite healthy when they reach 60. Or for example, increase of quality of life means that people realize that things like benzene is really dangerous or mercury is really dangerous, so they stay away from it. People are generally more healthier and less likely to get dementia. Fourthly, proposition needs to support, for example, from local elections, electing councillors, regional or provincial governments, all the way up to national level when people run for prime minister or president. Crucially, they restrict the right for voters to pick candidates aged about 60, even if they're completely capable or healthy. That's the burden that they fail to meet in their first speech. Some responses. I think a big push from proposition is that it get better politics. And the reason seems to be that there is a really bad optics for old people. They gave you 2 reasons. 1, they say old people mainly cater to rich people under a system of capitalism. Guys, unfortunately, that is really uncomparative. Because if parties want to get, for example, things like political funding, they somewhat need to cater to large donors on either side of the house, which young politicians probably still do that on their side of the house. Secondly, to talk about health, I think I ruled that out in setup. The second claim they make is that old people monopolize politics. I think that might be true in some countries, but it never proved to us what the harm is. Crucially, old politicians still have a massive incentive to cater to younger voter blocks because they simply want to get more votes. If it is true that young people are over 50% of the electorate, then surely there's a massive incentive for politicians to cater to them anyway. The last impact they give you is that, well, but policies affect young people for a longer time. Guys, that's just a fact that young people live longer, but the fact that we still care about things like pensions or things like retirement benefits, even if old people are about to die soon, doesn't mean that doesn't mean that old people just doesn't matter in politics. I don't think that weighing is genuine in this debate. Having that said, I want to talk about my first argument, about the principle of defending choice in democracy. The first observation I want to make is that they massively restrict choice for voters and the electorate. The reason for this is because the purpose of democracy is to aggregate people's opinion. This means that people should be allowed to pick and choose who they think can best represent them. Even if it is someone that may not be objectively good for side proposition, it is wrong for them to implement a blanket policy or a blanket claim that says as long as you're above 60, you're incapable. Because you're right that some people above 60 may have dementia, but also a lot of other people who are above 60 might be people who are healthy, might be people who are experienced, might be people who actually know their local communities the best. Those people are also ruled out on their side of the house. Our argument doesn't assume whether old people are good or not. It simply tells you that people, the electorate, should be allowed the choice to choose those people in the very first place. Similarly, even for example, if I believe Trump can best represent me, I should be allowed to vote for them. You can't say that's a wrong decision in any case. Likewise with this motion. This debate is about, for example, a 65-year-old politician who knows about the community that is now barred from running for the election on their side of the house. They restrict choice for people. We think that's a fundamental violation of the principles of democracy. The second observation is that they violate the principle for people running for office themselves. The essential part of democracy is that you should be allowed to run for office, and we respect pretty much a lot of rights. Yes, there might be limitations to people's freedom and democracy, but as long as, for example, you actually create good or provide more options for people, we generally believe that people are able to make the best decisions for themselves because people know what they want, the governments do not. Governments have one narrow conception of what people want, whereas different people know what they individually want. We think that's far better on our side. Think about this. Outside politics, if an old person gets rejected from a job, this will be seen as discrimination. We think this also applies to politics. There isn't a direct correlation between age and capability. We think they make that false characterization, they lose this debate. But finally, notice there's a high barrier to entry. For example, in liberal democracies, like previously convicted people can still run for election. And the reason why this is good is because we think that people should be allowed to pick for themselves. And the impact of this is that there isn't a wrong answer in democracies. We think that people should be allowed to choose based on what they want. Go.
Bad policies by incompetent politicians affect the transition. We prioritize choice with cruelty fundamentally that there's a massive negative impact of those bad politicians.
No. One, the purpose of a principle is that it doesn't fall into that trap. But secondly, that just is a practical. You can't just rehash your argument and make that a POI. But that's actually my second argument. The second argument then is on the value of age in politics. The thesis of this argument is that having candidates above the age of 60 is crucial because they bring unique benefits. It is not enough for a proposition to simply assert that old people equals to bad. The first thing I want to do then is to set up the clear comparative in this debate. On opposition, we allow parties who think will win the election, i.e. who the public generally likes pretty much, to run for election. On proposition, they create this narrative that aging is bad for politics. And notice, their policy doesn't only affect people who are 60 or above, their policy also affects people who are, for example, 40 or 50 years old. Those people will not be able to run for elections on their side. Why is this the case? Because this creates a massive chilling effect on their side of the house. Think about this. If I'm a party and I want to, for example, push for a candidate that's 40 or 50 years old, the reason why those people cannot run for election on their side of the house anymore is because they can't, for example, represent the party in many elections. This means that they might be right. In order for any of the benefits to stand, they need to predominantly prioritize people who are, for example, 20 to 30 years old. We're going to explain to you why this is harmful. So what do you think are the unique benefits of getting people who are, for example, like 40 or like 60 years old or above? The first is that those people generally have far more experience, knowledge, and understanding. The reason for this is because those people have a long political career. For example, being a shadow councillor, for example, they have interacted with the local community, they have experiences in setting up bipartisan deals. But even if you're outside, for example, in other careers, for example, after you led a trade union and you want to speak for workers in the politics, or for example, if you're a teacher and you want to craft education policies, those things just generally give you life experience. And notice, this is quite important, especially in post-conflict states. For example, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, who have been through the turmoil themselves, they truly understand the struggles, whereas young people can say, I relate to you, but people on the ground don't believe they actually have undergone those things and actually don't connect with them. But secondly, the vast majority of political positions are people in local careers. Most politicians aren't people who are running for president. And therefore, on a local level, people who are above the 60, oftentimes the vast majority of people who want to represent people on a local level. The reason for this is because those people are oftentimes more low paid, local jobs are oftentimes more time consuming, so people above 60 are oftentimes people who have retired. They have this unique experience. For example, they have seen how the area has evolved, which means that, for example, when they're running a planning commission, they can decide whether they want a shop to replace a park or a school that actually benefits the local community. They have a much larger vested interest in their local community. The impact is actually very simple. People simply make better policies on our side of the house with experience. They deal with disagreements externally, so they actually get more support and engagement in politics, but they also deal with disagreements within the party better. This is important because you lead the cabinet better. On their side of the house, they get more things like stalemates, no policies passed. Very proud to oppose.
We thank the speaker for this very high speech. Please, and then follow up the second opposition speaker. He may take their bench.
Am I audible? All right. All right. My speech is starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. While the old can pass down their policies to the young can never pass up their strength to the old. One point of framing we are handling in this debate. We think on our side of the house, there is a perfect spot, a perfect balance of age, wisdom, and experience, a surety that you're going to get the best possible version of a leader that you possibly can in society. 2 reasons this is important. 1, there is a mandate to encourage the utilization of this particular age bracket, to encourage people to utilize this mental sweet spot where there's no chance of them having a decreased mindset. But 2, OP can't come and argue the fact that apparently old people have the basic incentive to lead in specific societies. Why? The youth also engage in them. A 40-year-old man has lived in society for 40 years. He sees these problems, he experiences them, and as a result, he's incentivized to fight against them. We think old people tend to have tactics whereby they use things such as monopoly of rule. What does this look like? It looks like them using long-dead achievements which they were able to actualize in a different mental state of cognitive ability. It looks like them lobbying support because they're in the same age bracket as perhaps the more powerful people in society who have worked with them. It looks like them demotivating the younger generation to engage in society under the narrative that all is gold. We feel as though they are unfair workers in this particular metric. But let's go into engagement. 1, metric. The metric of experience being used in this debate. We think 2 reasons this is not like important in like the basic scheme. 1, they are merit-based, non-elected people in every case of civil servant actions. What do I mean? You have experienced teams, you have a head of staff, you have political advisors and whatnot. These are non-elected people, but they have an additional benefit. That is to say, they are not the experience of one term in office, or they are not even the experience of someone who has never even touched that office. These are people who've seen that work for 20 years, 30 years, and have been involved in these systems. We feel as though at that point in time, they are likely to help them. But you have the younger generation who are not as rigid in their mindset. So they're more likely to listen to these opinions. They're more likely to benefit them. Experience cannot be a clash on which side opposition wins. But 2, there's a strong party system in society. A 65-year-old man, take an example of Obama, can always tell Democratic candidates about the ideas that he has in society. If they are not accepted by the democratic system, that means perhaps they are not the best possible idea to benefit society at that given time. We feel as though people can still have a sharing of knowledge in both sides of the house. Opposition can't win on that clash either. But let's look at the nature of politics, because I think Weimar talks a lot about this, and it tends to be discounted by opposition side. Opposition says people have freedom of choice. We tell you, wait, freedom of choice is based on complete autonomy and understanding of what a particular system looks like. What do I mean by this? If an election doesn't have full disclosure, OP can't win on this. Why do most elections not have full disclosure? We think people inherently, subjectively have an idea that older people tend to be the smartest in society. Even culturally, traditionally, and whatnot, people tend to believe old people can actually lead in specific dialogues. And we think this is capitalized by people. They have limited exposure of specific candidates, or in the event that they do expose them, they control their tactics, like writing for them their speeches, or helping them, telling them how to behave in specific cases of status quo. A good example would be the United States election, which directly engages with the idea that there are checks and balances in society. What if that specific debate, where we found out Biden was practically a dementia patient, never happened? Or even worse, what if it happened while he was in office? Why are you giving nuclear codes to somebody who is at risk of specific problems when there are younger people who can be taught, who can be cultured by a system to come forward and lead in them? Obama was 44 when he came into power with strong democratic principles. Do they want to argue that a 40-year-old man is not fully capable of understanding, the dynamics of society, and thus fully engaging with them at any given scenario? We feel as though they do not have accountability because they're not full disclosure of whatever systems are in any given state. And this is the most important two questions to conclude engagement. One, if you have value, why not actualize it at a younger age? If Biden has had constant value, even as a president, he ran at a younger age. Why not utilize your value at a younger stage when you're better capable of working towards your policies? And this is important for two reasons. One, you're not letting down your party and the systems who've elected you. But two, you're not letting down the people you're able of handling. Biden has been a Democrat for a long time. The policies he's passing now are policies he could have passed 10, 20 years ago, are policies he could have passed down to someone else to end up teaching them. But two, why do you run the risk? Why not mitigate the harms? Why ignore the fact that it's an internationally well-known fact that an older person is less likely to be the best possible leader in society? We feel as though there's no speciality of one given individual, but there's a strong idea of ideas and concepts that work in basic society, and those are the grounds on which you should capitalize. Take it.
If your claim is that old people often have problems like dementia, would you also ban people above the age of 60 from voting because they might quote-unquote make bad decisions?
Vastly incorrect panel. First of all, people above 60 are not even the most people in any given society. But two, there's a difference between say, younger people also have opinions in that scale. So even if they have a problem, you're not really segregating that many people. But the most important thing is there's a difference between me seeing a manifesto of what a democratic candidate can do and me making decisions of international economics, politics, and systems. There's a difference between me knowing, hey, Biden's going to fight for abortion rights, he's going to fight for the LGBTQ rights, and me saying, hey, Biden's going to get the nuclear codes, putting him in systems where he has to understand the things. A man who does not know the difference between Putin and Zelensky, a man who cannot handle these specific things, we think there's a very large difference in complexity on both sides of the house. What's our main argument that's not raised by side opposition? We think the optics are very important in this debate. Why? You're only as good as your international connections in any given society. You're only good as to the level of buying you can acquire for all of your policies. We think everyone is fully aware of the weight of presidents in status quo. You're the man capable of starting a war. You're the man capable of signing laws that are going to change people's lives, the laws that are going to determine whether somebody has rights to actualize maybe in their abortion or even in regards to their sexuality. You affect people's lives to a large degree. Now, when it's an internationally well-known fact that you're not capable of reasoning at this age, and there's a very real cognitive decline that happens to these people at that point in time, countries are less likely to involve you in political systematics or even buy your opinions once you speak. Countries are less likely to stylistically buy or intuitively buy into the things you share. That means you said your policies that you want to defend do not benefit other people. And we relate back to the fact, why not get the J.D. Vances? Why not get Pastor Obama? Why not get younger people to bring these policies who are capable of being so good? What's the specialty of one specific man who's even old at risk of having these specific mindsets? But two, locally, you strengthen citizen backlash. Why? Citizens inherently want to be represented, and older people have more rigid and fixed opinions. They are less likely to change their mindsets based on given aspects in society. They are vastly rigid. We always say you can't bend an old branch. This means that all believe their ideas are going to generate net good. Perhaps they believe their concepts and the way the world worked before are what's best for society's given systems and whatnot. They perhaps believe that the way things happened back then, despite all the changes in economics, politics, and whatnot, are best for that specific time at hand. We think this is a harm in and of itself because not every group of people are being represented, considering all the different social transformations that have happened over the past time period. We think people then want to be represented. But opposition gives them the easiest way to generate backlash to these candidates and encourage their non-re-election. Why? They're going to say he's old. That's a very strong argument to be used against. You're looking at Biden. The backlash from his age was strong enough to make him step back from power. Why are you encouraging people who have backlash against your systems and literally handing them the tickets to reduce your competitive set? But the official impact of PCDs is that the citizens who do not then agree with you still do have a strong foundation for backlash. And even those who agree with you have less bargaining power. Citizens are less likely to participate in your policies. They're less likely to believe in your systematics. They're less likely to buy into the items that you're sharing. So what have you gotten from our panel? One, you can always pass down your policies to the young, but the young can't pass down their ideas to the old. Two, we understand that society needs leaders who are in this perfect spot whereby they have wisdom, they have knowledge, they have experience and understanding. Three, we've understood there are strong checking factors to ensure any president or any specific leader has a myriad of people working behind him who have been working in those systems to encourage him and teach him of what society should be having at any given time non-elected. We've understood that from our side of the house, the nature of politics, that's a fourth thing, can at times limit you from understanding the full extent of what a candidate looks like, and that generally compromises your specific autonomy. We've won this debate from second hope. With that, I rest.
We thank the speaker for his speech. We'd like to call the second opposition speaker, moving the case to the side.
Can everyone hear me at this volume? Perfect. I think it's pretty telling that throughout their first and second speeches, Team Uganda returned again and again to the example of Joe Biden, a man who literally stepped down and endorsed a younger candidate for president because he recognised, as many older politicians do, that his time was up. It was not enough for them to push this burden on us of standing behind a very narrow conception of this debate, of the fragile, senile, 80 or 90-year-old. Rather, they had to stand behind telling a healthy 65 or 70-year-old that their opinions are illegitimate, that they were not fit for political office. They had to stand behind taking out the Pelosi's and the Hillary Clintons and the Angela Merkels and the Nelson Mandelas of this world. And because we think those people do have valuable contributions to make to the political process, that is why we are so proud to oppose today. A few things in the speech. First, I'm going to be responding to their point on cognitive decline, then one point of clash on whether we think youth or age are more valuable in politics, finally a new argument on why this creates political polarisation and why that's an independent path to victory for us. But first, I just want to note their pretty scant response to our principled argument, because Alex brought you this in first, and he spent quite a lot of time on it. He explained to you that it is really, really important that individuals are given a chance to make a choice about who they want to vote for in democracy. Because democracy is a tool for preference aggregation. It allows people to make their own choices about what kinds of policies they want passed, and we think whatever choice people choose to make, when it's democratic, we think that is a legitimate choice for them to make. But also, we think it is specifically about identity politics. It's about trust. It's about if you, as a person in post-apartheid South Africa, look at Nelson Mandela, and you go, that is the man I trust. I don't want a younger candidate who might supposedly support the same policies. I want this man who has fought for my rights for the last 20 or 30 years. We say that is a legitimate choice to make. Their only response is that, well, you might not have perfect information throughout an electoral process. Like, sure, this might be the case, but this is true on either side. This is not a reason to ban specific individuals from standing for office. And we think there are checks and balances in place, like Biden did have to publish his health records, like individuals self-selecting out of politics. That means you do get good information about a candidate's health. Let's respond then to their argument on cognitive decline. Their claim was that older people are physically and mentally unfit for the demands of office. Two responses that takes this out of the debate. First, panel, I just think this characterisation is a little bit disingenuous. You probably know a 60-year-old, like maybe your parents are. Like, we just think this is well below the state pension age in most places. People all around the world work in demanding corporate jobs at this age. Many politicians do manage to be physically and mentally capable, like C. Merkel, Pelosi, even Joe Biden during his first term in office galvanised Democrats against Trump, pulled America out of a recession. We do not think that these politicians are necessarily all senile. We don't think it was fair for them to claim that everyone over the age of 60 is coming down with dementia. But second, even if you do buy this slightly implausible claim that the majority of people over 60 are suffering from cognitive decline, or that they'll struggle with the taxing walk from their seat at the UN to the podium, these sick, senile, incapable individuals are selected out on either side of the House. So Joe Biden stepped down because he knew that people wouldn't vote for them. Because if you're dying, you probably want to spend more time with your family, because you probably don't want your long-term reputation as a politician to be shot by the fact that you collapsed on the way to your speech at the UN. So we think these individuals do self-select out of the process under our side of the House. No, thank you. For that reason, this characterisation just wasn't really fair. Their only response in second is, well, why would you risk it? Because we just do not think that on a principled level it is fair to say, because of this tiny minimal risk that you might be diagnosed with dementia during your term in office, you shouldn't be allowed to run at all. Like, you might as well say that about a female politician. Hey guys, she might get pregnant, she might be on her period, maybe we just shouldn't risk it. We don't think this is a fair reason to say that someone literally should not be allowed to run. Having dealt with that then, let's talk about this clash about youth and age in politics. They claim that we want more young people in politics and that we only get this under their side of the House. They gave two lines of analysis here. The first, they said that the monopoly on power that older people have was used to push young people out of politics. First, as Alex told you, we just don't think this is a plausible characterisation of like why older people actually stay in politics. More likely, we think it's because voters positively identify them, because people in post-apartheid South Africa liked Mandela, because people trusted in Biden, because they associated him with the stability and the trust of the Obama regime that meant that they wanted to turn out to vote for him. But second, it doesn't really engage with who gets in their world. because on either side of the House, the more powerful people do get into politics. But we would prefer that those more powerful people are those who have earned donors and delegate supports from their long careers in political office, not those who have earned them from being born privileged, from climbing the greasy pole at a young age. That is who they had to stand behind getting jobs in their world, and they never dealt with this characterisation. Second, they said that the optics of having lots of older people in politics tell young people that politics isn't for them. But this is taken out by their own second speech argument on backlash. Because if it is true that young people get really upset when they see that everyone in politics is really, really old, I as a young person probably then do the AOC thing and I say, hey, I should stand, I should represent young people, I should also go into politics too. So by their own logic panel, that argument is taken out of this debate. But finally, we just challenge the premise that young people are necessarily better, because Alex explained to you why political experience, why life experience of having had a proper job, a family, of just meeting more people before your life climbing the greasy pole inside the political bubble makes you a better politician, because you've earned individual trust, because you might be better at doing local policies. And we think these things, individual trust, of having life experience, political experience, are really, really important things for a candidate. Before I go on to talk about political polarisation, sure.
Isn't it possible to principally actualize through others? Don't you get joy from seeing your policies being mandated, not specifically being the person who puts them into place?
Look, we think that individuals often appeal to voters through personal trust. I gave the example of Nelson Mandela. We think it's fine to say you want to vote for a particular individual. But also, we just don't think it's fair to say that people should be shut out of the political process because others can vote on their behalf, because you can get joy through seeing someone else exert the same policy. Guys, this is the rhetoric that was used to justify women not being allowed to vote, because, hey, they can get joy from their husbands simply voting on their behalves and voting for the policies that they would like. We don't think that's fair. We think these people do deserve the capacity to stand up for themselves, to have their own voices politically. Having dealt with that then, why does this create political polarisation? The first question to ask is, how do we think different groups of voters react to this policy? First, on older voters. And note panel, we really don't mean that old. Your parents are possibly over 60, my parents are nearing 60. These people feel massively rejected and disenfranchised on proposition side of the House, because they've literally been told, people like you do not deserve to hold office. You are too old to contribute to the democratic process. The majority of you have dementia. Your voice and views need to be shut down, and we will literally put laws in place to keep you out of the democratic process. Just think about how damaging this narrative is, because it plays into the idea that many older people already believe in, that the young are disrespectful, ungrateful, and devaluing the contributions of those who became before them. So now, your slightly conservative grandparent, who thinks young voters are a bit silly and arrogant for talking so much about climate change, now thinks that there is a conspiracy to devalue their voices. So they no longer think, well, I want to vote for good policies on student loans because I care about representing my grandchildren. They think, I've got to look out for myself. So they vote for the candidate who stands on the platform of, I will represent old people, the 55-year-old in their world who takes that policy. But second, younger voters are now legitimising the idea that older people don't deserve political voices. So you legitimise this identity-focused narrative of you'll be dead in 30 or 40 years, which again probably isn't true in the current age of those who are over 60. You make that even louder, you get political polarisation. But also, politicians no longer cooperate. You delegitimise the contributions of older people. So you no longer have Kamala Harris paying tribute to Condoleezza Rice, supporting those who came before them, passing down policies and passing down experience on their side of the House. Because we get better political representation and defend democracy, so proud to oppose.
All right, am I audible? I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. It's principally wrong to give nuclear codes to a person that is at risk of dementia. To place the lives of citizens in the hands of someone who is at risk of not finishing his term is just bad for the country and for any community we are so proud to propose. First, clarity. I think Zephyr's POI becomes important in this debate because what it does is it proves to you that you don't necessarily have to be an elected official, you don't have to be seen as the president or as an MP to have an influence in policy making, to have your ideas viewed. You can reach 60 years of age, resign, and yet you still have an influence in the party. You can still say, hey, I think this policy is good. You can still advise Democratic Party nominees on certain policies, even when you're not an elected official. That thing becomes important to say that you can still self-actualize even when you're not an elected official, but you are still a politician. Two clashes in this debate. Firstly, which side has more young people involved in the political process and why that was an important part of the debate. But secondly, is about cognitive decline and why we are better in terms of that. But before that, 5 pieces of the engagement. The first thing and their main push, and this is their only mitigation thing, is that, hey, there are checks and balances on their side, and because of checks and balances, we have people who are not having dementia in office. There are two responses. Zephyr already gives you the first response, in that oftentimes there are politicians who hide their records, politicians who don't fully disclose. That's why you see people like Joe Biden, even though he was 78, refused blatantly to review to disclose his full records. He refused to go for medical tests. But secondly, even though you didn't buy that response, we find that many people who suffer from this dementia, it happens when they have already entered office. That is to say, Rema's characterization proves to you that political office has a huge mental toll. It often involves you suffering from this mental decline as you're in office. Obama entered when he was 44, left when he was 52, but when he had gray hair. That literally shows to you that these people have a huge mental stress that happens when you're in office. These things often happen in office. Why our side is then important is because it shows to you that it's better not to take that risk of someone who is 65, of someone who is 70. Hey, maybe he hasn't shown conditions of having dementia, maybe he has stage 1 dementia and you cannot see it, but it's not better to take the risk because it's more likely that you're going to get it when you're in office. We are not willing to take the risk. Their second main push is the idea of choice, and I think this is their main principal argument. Their side is that you restrict choice. There are two responses to this. One, I feel like choice is not an important debate. We are willing to take the headline and restrict choice for two reasons. One, we have no problem restricting choice given that these are people who affect policies of an entire country, of an entire community. We are unlikely to value choice if these people are, one, going to make bad policies, secondly, be bad to the international community, but thirdly, just aren't able to handle the pressure of politics and ruling a country or a community. We feel like that choice is just useless in this debate. But secondly, we feel like naturally the polls show that young people tend to lean towards younger populations. That's why France had a landslide win of President Macron when he ran for office. Young people generally choose to vote for younger people, for younger politicians themselves. There's a tending narrative that young people actually want to vote for younger politicians. That's why they voted for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as a representative in New York. There's a growing influence of them voting for younger people. Their choice is leaning towards the young people. The third thing they talked about is the idea of like 60-year-olds not all being that we're just straw money and saying 60-year-olds. There are many 60-year-olds who are like unhealthy, who are healthy, and all those kinds of things. We have two responses. One is that they are blatantly arguing with facts. The facts is that 53% of elderly people have had some kind of dementia, whether it's stage 1 dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's disease, whether it's late stage dementia. You can't argue with the fact that there's an increasing rate of dementia, increasing rates of people who are old and are facing these kinds of things. What that means is two things. One is that you can't argue that there's a majority of politicians who enter when either maybe they are at stage 1 dementia or maybe it's just dementia but they haven't yet experienced it and it hasn't come out. But secondly, it shows that dementia is more likely to happen on their side. Before I go into the clash wing, I'll take your point.
Would you stop a pregnant woman running for office because it's principally wrong to run the risk? Sorry, would you stop a pregnant woman running for office because it's principally wrong to run the risk of giving nuclear codes to someone who might?
I don't see how pregnancy inhibits your ability to run for. I think pregnancy and old age is completely different. I think old age inhibits your ability to think. I don't think pregnancy inhibits your ability to think and run a community. Where I think pregnancy and old age are completely. It's just a useless clash in this debate. First clash is about where we get younger people. I think the main push on our side and the intuition pump, which was particularly important and why we win this debate, is the idea of optics. Why is this true? Even in Ops' best case scenario, whereby they're able to somehow prove to you that 60-year-old people are okay, they can run for office, we still show you that the optics of young people is significantly bad on their side. Three mechanisms Rema put in. One, how they see old people are unable to respond to their issues. Secondly, the media narrative that these people are like sloppy, that these people are unfit generally to run for office. But thirdly, how they feel like these people don't relate to these issues. Even when a 60-year-old person is at the peak of his ability, even when you can prove to me that a 75-year-old is at the best mental state, it doesn't take away the optics that young people have, that old people, that people who are 60 and above are unfit to run for office. There are two impacts which come with that. One, it means that they are unlikely to engage in the voting process because they say, hey, there's no reason why I'm going to vote. I'm picking between two people who are old and two people who are not going to affect my country in any way. They are not going to make any change. But secondly, it means you're having a general lack of approval to whatever leader you put into power. It means that whether you put in Biden or Trump, whether you put in a 62-year-old or a 72-year-old, there's going to be little approval. There's going to be backlash on media. That's why you have things like Sleepy Joe, when this is literally the president of the United States, but there's no public approval simply because he's too old or simply because there's a bad narrative around him that he's unfit for office. The second thing in this particular clash that we particularly push is the whole idea of the election process itself. We gave you three mechanisms. One is the idea of monopolizing politics. Secondly is the tendency of corruption among people who are older. But thirdly, the mere fact that because they are older, it means they have gotten into the system. It means they are able to manipulate the system. It means they're able to detain younger politicians. For example, in countries like Uganda, where younger politicians are detained because President Museveni, who is 82-year-old, doesn't want threats to his political party. We proved to you that younger people are more likely to engage in a political process in two fronts. One, voting, they're more likely to vote when you have younger candidates. But secondly, they're more likely they themselves to run for office because they see they actually have a chance, because they are not subject to like lobbying from big older officials, but secondly, they are unlikely to be having this kind of corruption tendencies. Before I go into the second and final thing, I'll take your point.
Different age groups have different optics. For example, young people may have the optics of learning experience, so optics isn't key majority.
Here is what
allow voters to choose based on the individual on the ballot, rather than rely on a generalized and inaccurate optics.
Here is where experience doesn't fall into this debate. Ryan Ma's characterization actually takes out experience because she proves to you right from minute one that most people who enter politics are people who start at a young age. You start at 25 years old as an attorney or someone who is in a law office. You build your way 15 years later, you have experience, you're a 40-year-old man. You are still at the highest peak of cognitive ability, but you have gained a certain level of experience. Experience is built over time. Even the best politicians start when they don't have experience. Experience is built over time. We don't feel like a person who is 50 or 40 is suffering from a lack of experience because they have generally started at an old age. Experience is also something which is not important. Third final clash is about cognitive decline. We had two pushes here. Firstly, Rema's characterization was what is needed for politicians. She tells you three things. One is mental resilience. Secondly is a lot of on-the-go work. And thirdly is mental stability to handle a lot of pressure. Our push was simple, that we say that there is a struggle of older people to handle these things, essential tasks like going from country to country all the time, doing multiple tasks simultaneously. We tell you because of two reasons. One is because they're generally weaker, they're generally in decline, but they have passed that age where they are at the tip of their cognitive ability. We tell you that when people are in cognitive decline, they are unlikely to make better policies, they are unlikely to have buy-in from the international community, and they are unlikely to have approval support. We win this debate on two things. One, we prove to you cognitive decline changes the optics, and we prove to you that the optics are unlikely to make younger people engaging. We show to you why younger people are important and why they are the most important factor in this debate.
Uganda had to stand by a world where they said that all people over the age of 60 would be bad at being a politician. That is to say, they had to stand by a world where Nelson Mandela could never have been elected because although he had lived through conflict and although he was one of the only people who at that time could reconcile a wounded nation, he might develop dementia in the next couple of years. We conversely didn't have to stand by a world where all politicians were over the age of 60. We had to stand behind a world where people could choose based on their own optics, based on their own subjective perceptions, which is literally the way that a democracy works, who they want to have in power. So we do have young people on our side of the house, such as Charlotte Owens in the UK. The difference is that they're not there just because they're a young person and just because Uganda feel like young people only want to vote for other young people. They're there on merit. They're there because they can persuade other people that they have good policies. That was the essence of democracy, and that was only protected on our side of the house. Three things to talk about in this speech. Firstly, on better policy making. Secondly, the engagement of young people and lastly, on the principle of democracy. But before that, let me just remind you of my split on polarisation, which received absolutely no response. What we tell you is that older people feel rejected on their side, that discourse is poisoned, and that politicians delegitimise older politicians' experience by saying that you're too old, they argue amongst each other, whereas on our side of the House, you might take on a younger politician as a mentee on their side of the House. Politics and discourse is bitter. This alone can probably win the debate, because when there is more infighting, when policy making gets far worse, because running for the primary on their side of the House is beset with conflict. Instead of choosing the best candidate, the candidate that you believe can best appeal to people on the ground with the best policies, a looming consideration is always age. It's always for the 45-year-old, well, you're almost 60, you're probably not going to stand and serve the party for a long time, so we don't want you. At that point, note this also takes out their only mitigation to our principle on choice, which is we restrict choice if bad decisions are made. We show you why better decisions are likely to be made when we are more likely to make decisions as to who is running, based not on the arbitrary factor of age, but based on policy and without infighting. First thing to talk about then is on who gets better policies, because what essentially they tell you is that the older you grow, the less productive that you become, and that old people might get dementia. A couple of responses here. Firstly, as we tell you down the bench, you're probably likely to go anyway. This isn't just about relying on medical records being disclosed. You probably also, if you're old, have your family saying, well, this is a lot of work that you're going to do, and you should probably step down and spend time with us instead. 69% of old people might have dementia, but that doesn't mean that 69% of the people who are older than 60 running for the president or any political office have dementia. We think that if you do have dementia and you feel like you can't take on the burden, if you don't want to be under the scrutiny of people trying to get your medical records, you're probably not going to apply for that position in the first place. They say that politicians don't freely disclose their records, but firstly note that Biden stepped down because of speculation. He didn't even need to disclose his records. Secondly, there is so much scrutiny on these politicians when they're there in the first place. Let's compare this to their claim of career politicians tend to monopolise politics and engage in corruption. I mean, the first thing to note is that this is just an assertion. Often politicians who've been there for a long time still do want to build their legacy, and they're not always going to engage in things like corruption and the entrenchment of power. But secondly, if this isn't the case, they are still likely to be there in politics, a presence in politics, who's bankrolling younger politicians, as they say you can pass on advice to younger politicians. But at that point, when they aren't the one actually running for office, when they aren't the Biden who's going to be running your country, you don't get the same level of scrutiny trying to get them to disclose their medical records. You just get their influence in a far more insidious way. And so the domination of politics by people with dementia still occurs, only in a far worse way under their side of the house, in a way that can't be called out. But secondly, I would say that giving nuclear codes to a 20-year-old who's never had experience in politics in the first place is also really, really harmful. They probably don't know what they're doing. They have a greater chance of leaking it. We would far rather have people who do have experience in politics who've climbed up the ranks. They say to this that, well, why don't you use your value if you are a valuable politician at a younger age? Why didn't Biden become president at the age of 20? Two responses. Firstly, because he couldn't. Talent isn't something that is static. Biden was never the chosen one who was always going to be president. Biden did want to be president at the age of 20, and he ran in the 1980s, and he didn't get it. His talent only came because of the fact that he spent 50 years in politics and had experience, and when he got into office at the age of 78 or whatever it was, he was actually really good. He actually improved the climate. And no, that also takes down their thing about young people not engaging with older politicians. This was an issue that was incredibly important to a lot of young people. But secondly, note that often the only way of actually getting younger people, of people of lower class backgrounds, for example, into politics is allowing them to have a long career and a long trajectory in politics. Because if you do come from a lower class background, you can't suddenly drift into politics at the age of 60 like Trump did. You have to work your way up. You have to firstly be a chief of staff. You have to firstly work on polling. You can't run like before the age of 60, and what they do essentially is nip the talent in the bud of these people. These people could only get into senior offices when they had the opportunity to develop their talent, to rise up the ranks in politics. And I think getting these people into politics actually increases turnout, disrupting the perception of politics as a sphere that's actually very incredibly removed from people. But note also the material that we brought you in first that hasn't got engaged with. It's incredibly important, especially in post-conflict states, to have experience and knowledge and understanding of something that's happened in the history of your nation. And it's really important also when you have other careers, when you are able to cross-apply this knowledge and you have had a long track record. The impacts of this were really important. Firstly, you know how to break deadlocks when you're in politics. Policies are more likely to get passed in the first place. But secondly, you also have legitimacy and respect. You are more likely to run a better government, and so older people are incredibly valued in politics. They shut them out. Yes?
And then if it slips to an entire session and can't put sentences together, but still doesn't really get out, don't you think we need to find ways of getting more able people?
If you can't put sentences together, you're probably not going to get elected, because the way people elect you is based on the kind of interviews you engage with, the campaigns you engage with. You can't form sentences, you're not going to do very well. Second thing then is improved engagement of young people. They essentially say that on their side they get young people running in elections and young people engaging in elections. Couple of responses here. Firstly, in many cases, as we tell you from first to no response, often young people just aren't going to stand for elections on their side. For example, municipal elections, smaller level elections. This is because these are lower paid roles, they don't have much prestige, and people who are young people who need to make money just can't engage in them in the first place. So on their side in these elections, you just have a smaller candidate pool, you have a lower quality of decision making and candidate quality, and that's what actually makes people, both young and old, stop engaging in elections in the first place. But secondly, if trust is actually affected by age, you probably don't vote as a young person for an old candidate. And in most systems, if one party chooses an old person to run, for instance, Sheinbaum in Mexico, the other party is probably going to pick a young person because it creates contrast, because of the fact that you're more likely to appeal to a greater voter bloc. So there probably is a young candidate for you to choose from on their side of the House. And note also that older people do have the incentive to cater to young people if their competitors are not doing so, because of the fact that they do want to maximise their votes. And that's why we see politicians like Bernie Sanders, who are old but actively do cater to young people. And thirdly, I think a track record is an incredibly good thing. You're more likely to have it if you're old. I don't look at a young person and say, I feel represented because he's also my age. I look at somebody who's actually been able in the past to get good education policy, who's actually done something for the environment. That's when I'm more likely to cast my ballot, and that's when we get improved engagement for young people. Lastly, then, talking about democracy, because we tell you that voters have the right to choose, and this is an independent path to victory, because regardless of who we get into power, we should be able to choose for whoever we want to rule us. They say that this is based on the premise that there isn't a complete understanding. Firstly, they themselves don't believe this when they say that young people vote for young people because they are young people. But secondly, this doesn't matter. We allow people to vote for anyone they want based on their subjective perceptions. I'd be allowed to spoil my ballot based on my subjective perceptions. But thirdly, if it is true that older people aren't appealing, then when they just remove all these older people completely, people are less likely to vote. This is really bad for democracy. That's when turnout actually goes down, so their greatest good actually occurs on their side. Because we protect democracy, very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Speaker. Five speaks for the
As a young person on Team England's side of the House, when I go to the ballot box, I have choice. If I live in South Africa, in post-apartheid state, I might decide that the only person I trust to make my life better is Nelson Mandela, that even though he's over the age of 60, he is the only individual in whom I have the personal confidence that he can heal my wounded nation. If I'm a young German living in 2020, if I decide that I think Angela Merkel is the only person with the experience, with the political know-how, with the connections and understanding to lead us through the incredibly unstable time of the COVID-19 pandemic, I have choice. I can choose to vote for her. And you know what? If I'm a young person who feels shut out and disenfranchised by the older people who dominate politics, I can decide to protest against that too. If I live in the US, I can vote for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. If I live in the UK, I can vote for Joe Swinson or Charlotte Owens. And if I live in Nigeria, I can vote for Peter Obi. In our world, you can choose what matters to you. You get to decide. Do you want experience? Do you want the younger protest candidate? Do you want the person who knows stability? Do you want the person in whom you have personal trust? We cater to all of these individuals on our side of the House. By contrast, in Proposition's world, they take away choice with their blanket, implausible understandings of what they think the world looks like for older people. For that reason, we think we win this debate. Two questions to ask when adjudicating this debate: who goes into politics and who do we want to go into politics? First, on who goes into politics. Propositions say that more young people go into politics when older people are pushed out. But we told you first that their own example of Macron winning a landslide victory in France shows that this argument just really wasn't super impactful in today's round. Because if, and I quote, young people want to vote for younger politicians on either side, those younger politicians will stand and they will get elected either way. So it's really not clear from their own case that there was actually a pressing problem that needs to be solved, especially when I gave you the example of AOC, especially when Jess gave you the example of Charlotte Owens. But second, They don't give us any reasons why, even if this is true, it's actually a good thing to have only young people in politics. They never exactly explain to you why they think this is debate winning. By contrast, we told you that this is not necessarily a good thing, because if you push all of the older people outside of politics, you take away that choice that is so valuable. You take away those individuals who can offer experience and guidance. You take away those individuals in whom certain people have personal trust. They never engage with the fact that that choice is necessarily good. They simply asserted that younger people were the only people able to represent individuals. The only semblance of a metric they actually bring you is in first, when they say, well, we have a greater diversity of candidates because more young people are involved. But panel, that was literally what we stood for on our side of the house, when we said both young and old should be allowed to run for political office equally. They had to stand behind pushing older people out of politics and saying that only a certain group should run. That's why that was so damaging for their case. By contrast, we brought you the principle of choice. We explained to you why in a democratic society, even if your information is imperfect, you probably know who you personally trust. You probably know what you personally prioritize. You should be allowed to decide what is best for you and your country. But second, who do you want to go into politics? Because they brought this case from first about cognitive decline. I rebutted this by saying first is just an implausible characterization of what people over 60 look like. And even if it's true, these individuals select themselves out on either side, and they never dealt with that. Jess told you about the specific pitfalls befalling young politicians, how in their world you might not want to give the nuclear codes to a 20-year-old. But look, Biden chose not to run on our side of the house, so we just don't think people experiencing significant visible cognitive decline were the marginal change in this debate. By contrast, we told you about the people we want to go into politics, who have political experience, who have life experience, who haven't just spent their entire youth climbing the greasy pole so that they could achieve political success in the top job before they turn 60. Rather, we support the individuals who've had careers and life experience beforehand. We told you about personal trust. We told you often they're willing to do the stuff that younger people aren't, and they take on important, valuable jobs in local government. So because we preserve voter choice and because we benefit from experience as well as youth, we are so proud to oppose.
Thank you, Speaker, for this very fine speech. We'd now like to call up the corporate back to those who take their side and then take the call.
Okay, can I be heard? Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A team England claims that Biden never got the post when he was 20. It was because of the monopoly that was already created by the older politicians that prevented him from getting this post in power. Side opposition restricts choice to individuals who have already monopolized the political systems. We give you 3 reasons as to why they restrict politics to the older generation. 1, we tell you that the monopoly of politics due to the power that is already accumulated with the massive money that these individuals have. Secondly, we tell you that in many countries, things like corruption exist. Countries like Uganda, even if it is a democracy, we tell you that corruption exists and rigging of votes exists. But also finally, we tell you things like arresting of political opponents exist. And this is a clear characterization that comes in first speech, which they don't engage. The responses that they give us are twofold. 1, they tell us that they give choice to individuals, but we tell you 2 major things. 1, it is not choice when individuals are coerced to voting people who already have high places in power. It is not sort of choice, but also secondly, Jesse tells you specifically in his speech, if choice is important, why don't we give children that choice to participate within these elections, right? Secondly, they tell us that they have checks and balances existing within their side of the house. This is still mitigated from our first speech, our second speech, and third speech, when we tell you that things like corruption literally exist within these countries. They don't give us any responses as to why this is not true. They cannot take it at that point. We tell you that is why, even if younger people don't want older people within power because of like them not being able to make sentences, they still put them into power because of them being able to rig or manipulate these political systems. They cannot take this debate at that stance. Secondly, they give us something to do with like older people having an incentive to benefit the society. What do we tell you of this sort of idea, right? We tell you that one, all of us live in the society, we experience the bad things that happen within these societies. That gives us an incentive to work on those societies. But we still tell you that the specific thing about younger individuals is that they have a longer term stay within the society. That means that they would want to benefit the society more. And this specifically comes in my speech and Zephyr's speech, which is something that is not tackled by their side of the house. But also secondly, we still tell you that on our side of the house, if individuals can be involved within political systems, that is to say their policies can still be passed on to younger individuals and they can still self-actualize at that instance. They don't respond to that, they cannot take this debate. Thirdly, they tell us that older individuals can still feel neglected and polarized within the society. We think that the same push that they had with saying that the state has an incentive to protect younger people is the same push that we still have on our side of the house to say that the state will still want to protect these older individuals. We think that this is something that is rather symmetric. It cannot exist within this debate. Finally, they give us something to do with their experience and how these individuals have some sort of experience. We think that this was something that was first engaged in framing. When we tell you that this is a merit-based process, that means that we're not going to get each and every individual just to run for office. But also secondly, we show how majority of the major politicians start when they're young and they get that level of experience from there. We think that that is something that cannot stand within this debate. What do we tell you from our speeches today? One, we tell you that we get more younger individuals within the political process, and that is something that is good. Why? We tell you this is under two circumstances. One, they can exercise politics because we break the monopoly. That means they can engage fairly and they go against each other. But also secondly, they can get to vote because of the better optics that exist. We don't get any response as to why we actually don't have as to the voter turn-up on our side of the house. Notice that this is an argument that exists from the first speech, which is not responded to. That means that they cannot take this debate. Also, secondly, we tell you that many leaders 60 and above still have problems to think. They have cognitive disabilities. That is to say 53% of them have these disabilities. We think that they do not clearly handle this. They cannot take this debate. Our case was never that there are no good leaders who are 65 years and above, but our case was they have problems that infringe on their working, which we need to solve with the younger generation being able to engage within politics. We take this debate from the side.